Evening, everybody. Labour conference in full swing in Brighton, and we get Keir Starmer saying, if you want to remain, vote Labour. Emily Thornberry turning up at fringe meetings wearing a European Union flag necklace, and yet, within the last half an hour in the hall, they voted not to fully endorse backing Remain in a second referendum. But just a quick sense of context from me. As I see it, is the Labour Party fought the 2017 general election saying they would respect the result of the referendum. The position now is that they will, if they win the election, they will negotiate a new deal which will involve us staying part of a customs union, a single market, put it to a referendum in the country. It'll be Remain against, well, sort of Remain, but they haven't yet decided which side they're going to back. It's quite possible, I think, that the next Labour government could campaign in the referendum against their own negotiation. But the trouble is, folks, I'm really so very partial on this, you might not take it from me. So let's get an independent view from LBC's political editor, Theo Ushwood. Theo, am I in the right direction with this?
You are in the right direction, Nigel. So Jeremy Corbyn, with the support of the National Executive Committee, they put out a statement. And in that statement, went out yesterday, this was their preferred position, and that was within 3 months of a general election, they'll negotiate a fresh deal with the European Union. In actual fact, we really know what it's going to be, because the European Union, when Theresa May was negotiating her deal, were fairly clear they'd be willing to accept a permanent customs union, much closer relationship, and then full access to the single market. Of course, that will have a price that would have to abide by European rules and regulations in order to have access to that single market and access to the customs union. So once that deal has been negotiated within 3 months, that'll be relatively straightforward. Labour will then hold a special one-day conference where they decide which way in the forthcoming referendum, which will take place within another 3 months, so within 6 months of that general election. So we're talking, if we have a general election in mid-November, we're talking by the end of April, May next year, there will be a second referendum. Labour will have a special one-day conference to decide which way, as the party of government, and of course this all hinges on Labour winning power at the election, as the party of government, they will go. Will they support the deal that they have negotiated with the European Union, or will they campaign to remain within the European Union?
So they could say potentially they'd campaign
against their own deal.
Does this offer clarity to voters, in your opinion?
So the conundrum that Jeremy Corbyn and those around him are facing is that they do not want to go into a general election telling Labour voters in overwhelmingly Leave constituencies like Hartlepool and Sunderland that they will hold a second referendum and then campaign to remain within the European Union, because they know that that will go down very badly. So they want to be able to say, on the doorstep, we're going to hold a second referendum, but we might actually campaign to leave the European Union in that referendum. They're trying to appeal to both Remain voters and particularly their Remain membership and Leave voters at the same time. And that's why they've adopted this position.
But if I'm a Leave voter in the north of England,
yes,
I would say, hang on, you've already gone for a second referendum when you said last time round you would honour the result of the first one.
Yes.
And with the referendum you're promising, you don't have a proper, clean Leave, even on the ballot paper. So it seems to me that he's in trouble already with those people, and equally with the Liberal Democrats. And whatever we think of their position and the contradiction against Joe Swinson's position in 2016, but the Liberal Democrats have an absolutely unequivocal
revoke Article 50 position.
So isn't there a slight danger here that Corbyn continues to stand in the middle of the road and get hit with the traffic going both ways?
So you've said that the Brexit Party would like a clean break Brexit, also known to others as a no-deal Brexit, a World Trade Organisation termed Brexit, where Jeremy Corbyn and Labour have repeatedly made the point, and have made the point at this conference, that they believe it would affect public services, it would affect the NHS, would have chlorinated chicken imported into the United Kingdom from America, a free trade deal with Donald Trump. That is the narrative that they are playing out, and therefore, where there is some agreement within Labour ranks, is they want to rule that out. So therefore they're saying, actually, the best deal that we can get...
So they're ruling out any trade deal with any other part of the world?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they don't want a free trade deal. That's not what they're particularly interested in. What they're saying is that they'll negotiate permanent customs union with the European Union, and then they will have a say in European Union international agreements with other countries.
I have to say, folks, what on earth do you do if you're a Labour canvasser knocking on doors, whether you're speaking to Leave or Remain voters? Clearly there's a shift towards Remain, but it's not the whole hog. The whole hog is being offered by the Lib Dems, and if you're a Leave voter, they've already let you down a couple of times already. Disastrous. Theo, before I let you go, I must just have a quick thought on what could be, the most enormous moment at 10:30 tomorrow morning, when the Supreme Court rules. Now, I have to say, I kind of had the view that the Scottish Court of Session ruling was very much because the government didn't themselves put in any defence. And I thought, well, it's almost unthinkable that the Supreme Court could find against the government. But I have to say, as tomorrow approaches, I'm beginning to wonder, is there any real intelligence on this?
Yes. The legal experts, and from those watching the debate, and I watched a lot of the arguments in court, is that at the beginning of this case, the government were fairly confident of winning. Indeed, somebody senior within the government told me that the Scottish Court of Session judgment, which ruled against the government, read like a Guardian op-ed, and they were feeling fairly bullish about the fact that they could win in the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. But, and this is the but, what happened last week in the Supreme Court was that the 11 justices in the Supreme Court, it came to their notice, to their attention, and the argument was made quite persuasively by Lord Pannick, who was representing the businesswoman Gina Miller, that if they are not to intervene and tell Speaker John Bercow that he can recall Parliament without the permission of number 10 Downing Street, then the precedent that is being set in the view of Lord Pannick, and this was taken on by Lord Kerr, one of the 11 justices, would be that we would in effect live in an elected dictatorship where what could happen is that any Prime Minister could come along, whether that be Boris Johnson or anybody else, and decide that Parliament is standing in their way, prorogue Parliament. In this case, Boris Johnson prorogued Parliament for 5 weeks, but they could prorogue Parliament for a year, for 2 years, and therefore that would fatally undermine, in Lord Pannick's view, our parliamentary democracy, whereby at every general election we elect an MP, and we would live in effect in where we'd have no elected representatives apart from the Prime Minister of the governing party. And that is what the case will hinge on. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. That's not for me to make a judgment on. I'm just saying that is what the case will hinge on, and that is why many who have watched the case very closely have come to the conclusion that actually the Supreme Court is likely to find against the government.
I've begun to, as I've watched testimony, think that more and more. Theo, thank you very much indeed. And of course the implications of that, folks, are that John Bercow would recall Parliament. Jeremy Corbyn may have to postpone his speech. The Conservative conference would become, they'd probably have to cancel it, basically. And I think Boris Johnson would have to offer his resignation to the House of Commons and ask them whether they wanted him to resign or not. That is how big tomorrow is. It is, as I predicted, epic autumn in British politics. We'll wait for tomorrow on that, but for now, Labour all over the shop, in my opinion. Are you clear as to what their position is? 0345 6060 973. Richard is a new caller from Kemsey in Worcestershire. Good evening, Richard.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, if you go and vote Labour next time round, do you know what you're going to get?
That's not going to happen. I would never vote Labour.
Right.
However, I've just been watching the Labour conference, and the point I was wanting to make was there were points of order called. A lady got up to onto the stage and said, "A lot of people have just walked into the auditorium. These are unaccredited people who all moved in just before some of the important votes were taken." The chairwoman wouldn't get them to move. She said, "No, I'm not going to get them to move out." and they were unaccredited, and they all voted.
You're not saying the vote could have been rigged, Richard, are you?
Oh, Nigel, would I say that?
A dreadful thing to suggest.
Yes, I am, actually.
How interesting. Right, well, you're the first person to have mentioned that. I've not seen this out there. I'll tell you what, Richard, we will follow that up. Thank you. And a big appeal now to any of you listening, any of you in Brighton, have you seen any evidence of what Richard said? Were you in the hall? Have you seen any evidence of packing? On Facebook, Alan says, Labour just handed all their Remain votes to the Lib Dems. David says, Labour delegates actually reject Remain. Well, what they do is they say they'll decide on it after the general election, and that is the Horlicks that this whole thing is. Paul says, Labour have made themselves unelectable and irrelevant. Not much sympathy out there for the Labour Party. Please, somebody please tell me that it's a rational political position to say that if you form a government and go and negotiate a new close relationship with the European Union and put it to a referendum, that you could even vote against the deal that you've negotiated. I cannot fathom it. It's nutso, in my view, but please someone tell me why it makes sense. 0345 6060 973. You're listening to the increasingly bemused Nigel Farage here on LBC. It's 6:15 and time for the news headlines with Lisa Raziz.
Hundreds of Thomas Cook customers are starting to arrive back in the UK on emergency flights after the travel company collapsed, leaving 150,000 holidaymakers abroad. Labour Party conference delegates have supported Jeremy Corbyn's neutral Brexit stance on a second
way, as if, my God, look at these ghastly people. Funny, isn't it, that at a People's Vote rally in Brighton a couple of days ago, she was very, very happy to be there on stage with a blue dress and a European Union ring of stars as a necklace. So the European Union flag, European nationalism is great, but English nationalism is horrible. And I wonder, Emily Thornberry, why maybe perhaps increasingly people think that the Labour Party is a party of North London and not the north of England. Let's go to Mike from Newham. Mike, good evening to you.
Hi, Nigel.
So what do you make of the vote today?
Well, first of all, before about that, I completely agree about the Emily Thornberry thing. It really makes me cringe to see Emily Thornberry do that. And I'm a Labour supporter. I'm actually a Labour member.
Okay.
But actually, on the vote, I'm really happy they've gone for the neutral position because as someone who toyed with the idea of leaving, I'm almost like Alex Tier. I'm no fan of the EU. I see how it can override national governments to implement austerity like it did in Greece. But I think, I'm glad conference supported Corbyn's position, which was to obviously negotiate a deal and then let the people vote on it.
Well, hang on. No, there's a step in the middle there, Mike. And the step in the middle is, in between negotiating a deal and letting people vote on it, they're going to have a one-day conference to decide whether they as a party will officially vote against their own deal.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Mike, it's nuts, isn't it?
Hang on, the party will have an idea of what the deal will be, right?
Well, we know what the deal is already. The deal is, and this is the real deception, and this is why even attempting, Mike, in my view, to use the word neutral doesn't make sense. It's going to be Remain against staying part of the single market and a customs union. I mean, Mike, they're not offering us any choice at all. Anybody that's a Leave voter will see that, I think, as a complete and utter sellout.
Okay, obviously I know it takes a bit of nuance, but as my understanding goes, it's not the single market and it's a customs union.
It's a single market and a customs union. It's the same.
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
Okay, and can I just say why I would be in favour of leaving, right? Because if there's negotiation and my thing with the EU is that I'm not in favour, just say if the EU prevents us from nationalising our railways, for example.
Which it does, yeah.
Obviously I know it's disputable, but that's what would come across in a deal. And if the EU said we're not going to, that would be all sorted out in a deal. And would vote leave if it meant the EU would be preventing us from nationalising our railways.
Well, I don't see under single market rules how, if we stay aligned...
But we wouldn't be staying as aligned.
Mike, come on. I put this to you, right? If we still have the European Court of Justice as the ultimate arbiter, if we're still paying money to the EU every year, if we're aligned with single market rules, we can't do our own trade deals around the rest of the world if we chose to, and we certainly wouldn't be able to legislate on employment law, the environment, or anything else, because all of this will be done at an EU level. That isn't leaving, is it?
Well, like I said, all that matters to me is that the EU doesn't interfere with domestic policy in terms of national renationalisation.
Well, Mike, I can tell you one thing. I'll tell you one thing. Right, okay, I'll tell you this for 100%, right? In the withdrawal agreement, the one that was rejected 3 times by Parliament, and the one that Boris now, it looks like, intends to get through, one of the absolute specifics in it is that we would not be able to apply our own state aid rules. So if you and I, Mike, thought, actually, British Steel should be saved, because actually strategically it's vital to the economy, the withdrawal agreement would prohibit us from doing it. And that's what Corbyn's going to sign up to. How can anybody like you support that?
Okay. Well, can I ask you a question? Just say, what option do I have? Because if I vote for the Brexit Party, you're not going to nationalise railways. You're not going to invest in hospitals and schools and all that. The Tories certainly won't. So if it comes down to actually choosing between not having my preferred Brexit decision, I'm trying to think of the word.
You might stay at home, Mike. You might stay at home.
No, I would definitely still vote Labour, because at the end of the day, I'm voting for the end of austerity. I'm voting for to make my communities more healthier. And to invest in things. And the thing is, even though I might support Leave, you won't do that.
Well, who's to say? Actually, you may well see, particularly with interest rates where they are, particularly with the threat of deflation stalking the Eurozone, you may well see actually all the political parties at the next election with expansionist policies. Mike, great chat, good to talk to you. Labour policy is clear as mud, Nigel, says Mike in Stockton on Tees. John in Hartlepool says, after 3 years of debate, it's now the hokey-cokey Labour Brexit policy, utterly bemusing. Nigel, the Labour Party has flicked a coin on their Brexit stance and decided that heads we remain and tails we remain. Just how stupid do they think we are, says David from Brighton. David, that's what I rather think. Liz says, Labour, I don't know what I'm doing party. Others suggesting, Jerry on YouTube suggesting it's the best comedy show in 2019 is the Labour Party conference. Let's get a Chris, who's a new caller from Colchester. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Nigel. I hope you're well.
I am well, but I have to say, and I'm trying to be dispassionate, but think about how elections work. And it seems to me that unless you've got a simple offer on the biggest issue of the day, you're going to struggle with the electorate. And I think Labour's policy is going to be totally confusing, Chris, to the electorate.
I don't think, well, I would agree that it is very confusing, but I'd also suggest that Labour's stance currently is very alarming, just in relation to what they're discussing at the Brighton conference, combined with the fact that they've got no real will to implement anything to do with what was voted for in the referendum. It just begs the question, how can someone such as Mr Corbyn, who potentially could find himself in a position as caretaker PM within the next week or so, be left to deal with our negotiations on our behalf, given how the behaviour is within their party and their stance on Brexit, combined with the far left rhetoric which is coming out of that conference, I think is alarming that someone of that ilk could be trusted to get us a decent deal of any sort, whether that, I don't even know what he'd get from the EU, but I am genuinely worried by the prospect of him being left with that in his hands.
Well, Chris, I'm going to talk in a minute about some of the other things that have been discussed at the Labour Party conference, and I'm with you. I think the move to the left is genuinely alarming. And And I have to say, we debated this yesterday morning from 11 till 12. I was on the Sunday show with LBC, and I talked about, is the party now being hijacked by the far left? It was a very revealing article by David Blunkett today, basically saying, yes, my party is being hijacked by the far left. And I think, Chris, it almost makes them unelectable.
Well, I'd like to think so, but obviously you can see who they're trying to appeal to in the electorate by some of the things that they're discussing and voting for at Brighton. And to the vast majority, especially to me, I would sooner not have a government than have that imposed on me in any way, shape or form. But for those that seem to think that Labour would end austerity and be this marvellous party that would sort out all of the wrongdoings of the previous government, I think is very short-sighted, bearing in mind what we endured for the Blair eras and Brown era.
Actually,
has left us where we are.
Actually, Chris, to be honest, for most of the Blair and Brown era, for most of it, we had growth. We had a reasonably good economy. It blew up in the end, I know, but for most of it, we had a fairly good time. Chris, I'm going to thank you for your call. You listen to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC at 6:30 in time for the news with Lisa Aziz.
Emergency replacement flights have started for 150,000 customers of the collapsed holiday firm Thomas Cook, who are currently abroad. Hundreds have already started arriving back at Glasgow, Gatwick and Manchester airports this afternoon, while Downing Street's insisted the government's...
For them. I must comment on something else. At the Labour Party conference yesterday, a vote and a comment by the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, who said, what we're saying is, let's have one education service for everybody and end these grotesque levels of inequality within our education system. The Labour Party are proposing at their conference to abolish private schools, to then seize their assets. This is communism. There's no other word I can use for it, and it isn't going to work. How do you improve the education of this country? By dragging down schools that are doing very well. And what will you say to taxpayers on low wages? Oh, by the way, you're now going to be paying for the cost of 615,000 students who, at the moment, are being paid for by their parents, but in future will be paid for by the taxpayer. So now it genuinely will, Mr. McDonnell, be the poorer people that subsidise the better off. And as for this concept that all private education is bad because it entrenches the position of the rich. Well, I'll tell you this, Mr. McDonnell. My school, Dulwich College, I went there. When I was there, 50% of the boys in my year were paid for by local authority grants. One of them is actually a presenter here on LBC and has been for some time. And it gave people, regardless of the economic circumstances of their parents, provided they'd reached a certain academic level, the opportunity of a great education. I'm pleased to say that through fundraising and private bursaries, that figure at my old school is up to 35%, and they aim to get it back to 50%. So actually, I think if the private sector acts responsibly and acts charitably, and that's why they deserve their charitable status, they can do a lot for people from poorer backgrounds. But I've no doubt, Mr. McDonnell, you all want us to be dragged down to the bottom in your new Marxist state. This is the most extreme thing, the most dangerous thing I've ever seen at any point in my life in British politics. Right, let's get back to the referendum policy. Let's go to Peter in Richmond. Peter, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. I just am flabbergasted by the policy of Labour when it comes to Brexit now. They had a miserable showing in the European elections.
They did.
And their policy is no clearer and probably much worse than it was then. They're not appealing to any side of this divide. It's just an absurdity.
Well, I mean, Keir Starmer, Sir Keir said today, if you want to Remain, vote Labour. Emily Thornberry says we're a Remain party. Tom Watson says we're a Remain party.
Well, that's fine. I accept there are individuals there that are really as pro-Remain as the Liberal Party is. Mm-hmm. But to say that we won't necessarily, we'll hold a referendum and we won't necessarily be campaigning for Remain means that Remainers have no incentive to vote for the Labour Party, and Leavers have got no incentive to vote for the Labour Party. In fact, it's a nightmare should the Labour Party win as far as Leavers are concerned, because not only do they want to force another referendum that Leavers certainly don't want, but they also don't want to put a real Brexit on the ballot. So there are no Leavers who are going to be voting for the Labour Party, and beyond any of this, can you imagine? I don't think we can say that the EU have been negotiating in good faith up to this point. But can you imagine how the EU will negotiate with these people when they know that the alternative will be Remain?
Do you know, Peter, I gave a speech in Strasbourg last Tuesday, and good faith was the phrase that I used twice in that speech. I was talking in particular about the withdrawal treaty and any future political declaration, that any future deal, if that was to pass, would rely on their good faith. I'm with you. I don't see any good faith. Peter, in short, do you think this position is an electoral disaster for the Labour Party?
I do. I think it's a suicidal position for the Labour Party.
Interesting.
I think they will be obliterated in the coming election, and I think all these policies that they're introducing, these radical Marxist policies that they're introducing at the moment, is really a smokescreen to try and divert attention away from their Brexit policy, because they must realise it's not a winner.
Okay, well, you certainly do, Peter. And Peter, tell me, finally, have you voted Labour yourself in the past?
I haven't.
You haven't? No, you just...
I haven't. No, but I'm looking at this completely dispassionately.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, Peter, listen, interesting analysis, and I have to say that's a phone call that I rather agree with. I do think Jeremy Corbyn is trying to stand in the middle of the road, and he's going to get hit by cars going in both directions. That is my view. Neil is a new caller from Bromley. Good evening, Neil.
Good evening, and viva la resistance, Nigel. Just quickly, I actually went to St Dunstan's College, and I'm 51 years old, and I think I've never heard anything so ridiculous coming out of the Labour Party about banning Eton and whatnot. But anyway, about Jeremy Corbyn, he strikes me as, I just can't believe it. If you were trying to explain politics to somebody, and you said, okay, well, look, they put forward a couple of policies, and it's down to the electorate which one that they want. But surely the leader would actually say, well, I actually support this one. It looks to me like someone is, say you're betting on a horse race. Everybody else has got the name of the winner written down. But what's his name? Corbyn, he doesn't say who he wins until actually the winner turns up and says, oh, yeah, that was the one that I put my money on.
Well, the thing is, Neil, that maybe in 2017 he got away with it. He got away with equivocation in 2017 by convincing Leavers in the North he was on their side and Remainers in London he was on their side. But, Neil, he can't do it again, can he?
Well, he's trying to please everyone and he'll end up pleasing no one. I mean, a leader surely is supposed to be someone that leads. I mean, if it had been anyone else, if it had been, what's his name, Ed Miliband, David Miliband, if that guy, who I don't support Labour, but I reckon if he had been around, they would have decimated the Conservatives, because they're especially when Theresa May was there, they would have walked all over them. But they're flummoxing around everywhere.
They're in real trouble. Neil, thank you for your call. Dean is a new caller from Streatham. Good evening, Dean.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for taking the call.
Go up far away. The floor is yours, Dean. You're on LBC.
Right. So this is something I thought I'd never find myself saying, but I actually feel a little sorry for Jeremy Corbyn.
Okay.
I remember when he became leader of the Labour Party, and I honestly thought, well, here's someone who I completely disagree with everything he's ever said. But how refreshing it is to have a leader that believes in something, has believed consistently in the same things, no matter how unfashionable they may be, and has always fought for those things. And opposite someone like David Cameron, that did seem like a complete breath of fresh air. And I think if Jeremy Corbyn hadn't become Labour leader, when he would have retired, he would have gone down in the history books as one of those backbenchers who always stuck by his guns for what he believed in. And one of those things he believed in was, a complete distrust of the EU.
Oh, Dean, we've played some of his speeches here on LBC. I mean, he makes me look like a moderate on the European Union.
Well, he's a Bennite. He voted to leave the common market. He voted against Maastricht. He spoke out against Lisbon. And now we fast forward to him being Labour leader, and he's been held captive by his party. And that one of those great principles he had, he's completely sold out. So when the history books come to be written, he's actually just another politician who's done and said whatever he wants to try and achieve high office. And that actually makes me feel a little sorry for him.
So you're sorry for him because he's betrayed his principles, but you still feel sorry for him?
Yeah, I do. It's just a bit sad.
You're such a softy, Dean. That's all I can say. You really are. But you've made the point very, very well. Thank you, Dean. Lifelong Benite, hardline Eurosceptic. But frankly, he's almost got no choice, has he? He's got the backing of Len McCluskey. He's got the backing of the unions. That's why he won that vote today. That's why they're not going all out Remain. Because if they were all out Remain now, there's no point having a renegotiation. They would actually have put themselves with that vote, if they'd gone that way, pretty much in the same position, indeed, as the Liberal Democrats. They haven't quite done that yet, and, Corbyn and McCluskey and others wanted to stop that from happening. Anthony says, so Labour won a second referendum with a terrible deal versus Remain. Honestly, what planet are they on? Robert says, I was a Labour voter. I'm now voting Conservative. Support coming in from Labour. Darren says, Labour wasn't at fault for austerity. Duncan says, the bankers caused the 2008 recession, not Labour. Duncan, it was Gordon Brown changing the banking rules in 1997, taking away regulation of our banks from the Bank of England and giving it to a bunch of tick-box bureaucrats based down in Canary Wharf that actually allowed massive overheating and expansion of the lending sector with building societies and banks. Yet, sure, there was a huge global problem that hit us, that came across from the subprime crisis in America, but it was much worse here, directly because of Gordon Brown. And interestingly, if you go back to that period, not a penny piece of taxpayers' money in Australia or New Zealand was needed to bail out their banks because they kept some sensible rules. Gordon Brown didn't. Anybody thinks I'm wrong? 03456060973. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. It is 6:45. Time for the news headlines with Lisa Raziz.
Hundreds of Thomas Cook customers are starting to arrive back in the UK on emergency flights after the travel company collapsed, leaving 150,000 holidaymakers abroad. Labour's annual conference has endorsed Jeremy Corbyn's neutral Brexit stance, voting to wait.
This is typical of Labour. If someone's doing better than someone else, the person doing what is the problem that needs addressing. They closed the grammar schools for the same reason, and it lowered standards. Why not close Oxford and Cambridge? Chris, the trouble is we have to debate Brexit nearly all the time because it is the dominant issue of our era. If it wasn't there, I would love to be talking about the grammar schools that existed in our country that gave people real opportunity. And I think the closure of the grammar schools is the biggest reason why actually the rich have got richer and the social divide has got bigger and bigger and bigger. If you look at Parliament today, look at our Olympic medalists, look almost anywhere, and what you'll see compared to 50 years ago, a lot more people from the private school system are succeeding in more areas of life than they were because fewer children from poorer backgrounds have been given the opportunity. And I believe that with all my heart and soul. Unfortunately, we are debating Brexit. We are debating the Labour Party. And I'm going to James in Pinner. James, good evening.
Yes, good evening, Nigel. Good evening to you. The thing that prompted me to call was one of your earlier callers called Mike.
Yes, he was a Labour supporter, yeah.
He was, and he was quite passionate about a number of the sort of policies that Labour have around ending austerity and investment in various areas of society and so on and so forth, and completely agree with all of that. But I think really, when we deal with this in terms of sort of lower level policy issues, as much as they are very important on things that should be done and need to be planned for, the reality is that until we are free from the ties that bind us through the European Union, things that we need to do to make the best for this country, we're just not allowed to do. And the most obvious part of that is the one that you've already mentioned, which is state aid. And whether you want to deal with utilities and you know, energy and railways or whatever it might happen to be, we need a kinder society. And to be kinder, we need people to be able to work in jobs that are value-adding, that are wealth-creating. And unfortunately, because the way the European Union works and the way they sort of split countries to do different specialisations. The only thing that we seem to be able to do in their eyes is financial services, and they don't even like that. So the chances of us being able to build industry in this country, which is going to put people into useful employment rather than working in sort of ancillary services, that covers
is limited. Yeah,
things,
no, and it even applies, James, to procurement. You know,
it does.
For example, if we wanted to say, right, we're going to buy a whole new load of trains, they're all going to get made by British maker. We can't do that under EU rules. And
I know all about OJUs. That's my background profession, so I know all about that. We can't go anywhere near trying to show any favour to developing businesses within our own country.
And this is crazy, isn't it, James? I mean, are you, James? Are you normally a Labour voter or not?
I would say I voted everybody, more or less, apart from yourself, Nigel, and that's nothing personal.
That's all right,
I could vote for you the next time. It's one of those things. So I always go on policy, not on personality, and I don't tend to vote based on what my own personal interests are. I always vote on the basis of what I think the country needs. And certainly my Brexit vote cost me money. I knew it would, and I tried to do the best I could to mitigate it at the time. But I did what I did, and so be it. I think the point I was going to make to you, which was just very interesting from that point there, when we were talking, what was the point you were just making? I've just lost it now, sorry. You were just saying about...
Which particular one was that?
I think we were talking about energy. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It was a small point, but I was going to illustrate the point as well. I used to work with...
I was talking about procurement. Procurement, I was talking about, James. I was saying we're not allowed. Well, the defence industry, under EU rules...
That was it. Okay, no, sorry. Let me come back to it. You're absolutely right. So I was working in Paris in the nuclear industry. The company I was working for had been fined in a relatively short period of time 17 times under OJU rules because they were favouring French suppliers instead of putting it through proper European procurement rules. And the attitude in the company, which I have to tell you is like 90% owned by the French government, is that's what we do.
But we don't, because if we're in a club, James, we obey the rules. James, lovely call, thank you. And James mentioned financial services. Deborah says, I disagree with you, Farage. We were hit hard in the global crash because of our financial services economy. Yes, I understand that, Deborah, but what I'm saying is Northern Rock were allowed to lend people mortgages 6 times the highest earner and with 125% mortgages. I do not believe if the Bank of England, who'd run our banking and lending sector since 1694 until Gordon Brown got in, if they were there, I don't believe they would have allowed it to happen. I could be wrong. We're up to Middlesbrough to talk to Daniel, who's a new caller. Hi, Daniel.
Good evening, Nigel. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you for keeping your promise and representing the Brexiteers.
Well, I had to come back. I had no choice. But Daniel, there you are in Middlesbrough. So you're in the heart of Leave country, but you're also in the heart of seats the Labour Party have held for 100 years. What are people to think?
To be honest, apart from Newcastle, that was more strong Labour, I predict they'll get wiped out. There's a lot of people who are angry with them. They've forgot the working class voters, and anyone who's voted Leave, they're just completely abandoned.
And how much do you think, Daniel, when a general election comes, there in the northeast, how big an issue is Brexit going to be compared to many other things?
To be honest, it's number one on the agenda. I mean, majority, apart from London, voted to Leave. So I think it'll go across the country that everyone will put Brexit as a top priority.
Well, if you're right, then Labour would be in trouble, wouldn't they? Although in many seats in the North East, they do have a big lead, don't they?
At the minute, but I think with this latest conference on their decision on Brexit, I think they just can't decide on the decision, and it's going to turn a lot of voters away.
Right, OK, Daniel, you're unimpressed by them. Thank you. Tracy in Chesterfield, we're running out of time, but please, what do you make of Labour's policy? Hi there.
I'm just sort of worried, really. I know the whole policy of Labour sounds idiotic, and they were toxic with the points that they were saying and everything, and the policies that they want to produce. But I just think that they're hoping that the Labour voters are so fed up whether they vote to leave or remain. They're so fed up with the whole issue, and they might just vote for their cherry on the cake, which is these wonderful made-up policies that are just.
Could they be, Tracy? Could they be right?
They're out with the fairies.
All right, that away. Okay, fine. Tracy, we're out of time. Thank you. Final point from George in Notley, who says, if Labour get in and ban public schools, where on earth will the Cabinet's children go to school? Very good. I like that. Well, I'll be back tomorrow at 6 o'clock. It could be an absolutely momentous day in British politics tomorrow. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. Up next, from the Labour Party conference in Brighton, it's Ian Dale.